Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Kerala Museum. I'm Rajeshwari. I'm the curator of General Lecture Series. The Kerala Museum is a vibrant beacon of the arts in Kochi. Set up in 1987, it is a brainchild of R. Madhavan Nair, who even then recognized the need for a cultural institution to provide experiential learning in history, fine arts, and performing arts in the city. Celebrating its 35th anniversary in 2022, the Kerala Museum launched its flagship initiative, General Archives, that excavates the micro-histories of Kerala, bringing storytelling to you through captivating digital exhibitions. The program is made possible through the support of Geojit Foundation and honors the cherished dream of the museum's founder, Madhavan Nair, to make history accessible to all. The recently commenced General Lecture Series is part of the programming around General Digital Archives, and today, in the 5th lecture, we present Dr. Mohamed Shafeeq Karinkurayil. Dr. Mohamed Shafeeq is an assistant professor at Manipal Center for Humanities. He earned his PhD in Cultural Studies from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, and has previously taught at the University of Hyderabad and the Central University of Kerala before joining Manipal. His research focuses on Gulf migration in Kerala, particularly in literature and visual texts. He has a forthcoming work titled The Gulf Migrant Archives in Kerala, India, Reading Borders and Belonging with Oxford University Press, and has published research articles in various journals including Economic and Political Weekly, Bioscope, South Asia, and more. We warmly welcome you, sir, to Kerala Museum, and I invite you to the podium. Thank you all and enjoy the session.
Hello. I'm immensely honored to be here today. I'm delighted to be part of this storytelling community around this space. So thank you for inviting me. I'll be mostly reading out my paper, which is called The Affiliations of Malayali Migrant Photographs. Okay, here I begin. In his typology of social times, Georgi Urwich has the following to say about temporariness. The term temporary designates groups which are dissolved as soon as the particular task for which they were originally formed is considered accomplished. We can list as examples A, crowd, B, a conspiring or plotting group, C, bands, D, the partisans, E, athletic teams formed for a single competition, or teams of scientific researchers dedicated to special inquiries, F, assemblies and meetings, G, demonstrations, and H, play groups. I continue, it's a long quote. In which time, so this is a quote from Urwich, I continue with the quote, in which times do the temporary groupings tend to live? To answer this question, three considerations are kept in mind. The temporary groups foresee their existence as limited and therefore they are in a hurry. They are thus inclined to live in a time in advance of itself, but their agitation is not always successful in finding the path between the present and future. More often, the present is projected in the future than the future in the present. In this fashion, time in advance of itself is tied to erratic time. Temporary groupings always live in an extremely tense and buffeted time where, in spite of all efforts, the predominant present is detached from the past and only loosely tied to the future. What can temporariness of Gulf migration contribute to the study of photography? two different kinds of temporariness mark the Gulf migration. One is forced by the Arab Gulf states, which look at migrant workers as strictly temporary and whose temporariness is crucial to the stable functioning of their economy. The other temporariness marks the phenomenology of Gulf migration among the migrants themselves. The Gulf migrant thinks that, and we are all very familiar with this, the Gulf migrant thinks that he or she is going to the Gulf only for a very short time and to meet specific ends, just so that I can build my house, or just so that I can marry off my sister. For example, Najib, the protagonist of Goat Days, says, I dreamt a host of dreams, perhaps the same stock dreams that the 1.4 million Malayalis in the Gulf had when they were in Kerala. Gold watch, fridge, TV, car, AC, tape recorder, VCP, a heavy gold chain. I shared them with Sainu, his wife, as we slept together at night. I don't need anything, Ika. Do return when you have enough to secure the life of our child. Is it going to be son or daughter? She's pregnant. We don't need to accumulate wealth like my brothers. No mansion either. A life together, that's all. Maybe the wife of every man who is about to leave for the Gulf tells him the same thing. Even so, they end up spending 20 or 30 years of their lives there, end quote. In the use of the word temporary, my first debt is to Deepak Unnikurunnan's work, Temporary People, which, as I have stated elsewhere, in its architecture, is evocative of lost books of the medieval times, much like the eponymous migrant laborers, whose temporariness make them a lost people who haunt the cityscapes of the Gulf. The biographical and Bildungsroman form, seen in other Indian Gulf fiction, is replaced here with a host of characters delineated in different degrees, some recurring while others not, whose lives shuttle between agency and passivity in a world that moves according to its own inscrutable logic. The inexplicability of the fictional space is in itself an allegory of a world in which migrant labor is both indispensable and disowned, and subject to forces beyond the immediately palpable. The saga of migrant labor under late capitalism is, for Deepak Unnikrishnan, of cosmic proportions, unyielding to the logic of realist fiction. What exactly is it to be temporary? Temporariness is to stay in time. Its temporality is made obvious in its name, temporary. It is to stay in time such that time is its primary identity. To be temporary means for the time being. Time being, a being insofar as it is characterized by the present. However, it also is the signal of a different time, one that is at a tangent from the past and the future. For the time being supposes that the future can be reconnected to a past without the recourse to the present. The temporary is then a makeshift present. To be temporary is therefore to stay in time knowing that one's time will come. And as such, therefore, it is only a parallel version of the present, a contaminated version of the present, for the uncontaminated one exists as a conditional subjunctive reality. Temporariness is therefore an alternative life form. Since it is not the real being, it allows for experiments. In the future, when reality takes over, the present can be a reminiscence of a life that was too fantastic, too weird to be believed. Indeed, this is the format in much of the Gulf fiction because almost all of them are memories, are written as if they are memories. Not only is the Gulf a distant memory that is too strange to be narrated in the present. It is also a space where identities are newly forged. So for the time being, I will take just one example, and this example is from Nisamuddin Rauter's Arabiya Adima, 3 instances of name giving in this novel. 1, it was the scavengers who named Hanifa Saip. Another, it was Muhammad from Kollam who goes transformed into the renowned Vaidyar. He tried his hand at several things in Arabia, all in vain. Finally, Saib showed him a way, brew hook. With the hook gaining on strength, the scavengers made Muhammad Vaidyar. And the third example, the scavengers know Lukachan is not a Christian. He is Imbichi, a Methan from Kollam. A Christian Lukachan brought him to Saudi. Thus, Imbichi became Lukachan. What could naming be but the indicator to a pre-linguistic concreteness of the body itself? So this novel is about a migrant worker who has lost his memory. He cannot recall his past. He does not even recall his language. The character is not the only person with a loss of memory. Even his Arab employer is in the grip of amnesia. Years later, when faced with his former employee, the Arab Arbab does not even remember his Indian employee. So there are 2 different timelines in the novel. One, so the protagonist's name is Unni. So the novel begins with Unni's escape from his Arbab, Majid, and is therefore in the present. Then there is another timeline, which starts from Unni's home, his hardships, and his decision to migrate to the Gulf. But since the protagonist has lost his memory, both the orders are narrated from a third-person perspective, which is very different from regular Gulf narratives, which are mostly first-person. The 2 narrative orders resemble each other, except that they have very specific beginning and ending points, which make it therefore historical. But both the beginning and the ending point is home. What this means is that once we remove home from this sequence, the order of the time is irrelevant, as what is happening is a repetition of the same pattern over and over. Bonded labor, escape, betrayal, capture. And it is written, this novel is written in such a way that you have 3 chapters in the beginning, which is in the present, and then there is a flashback, and then it goes back to the present and goes back to the flashback. And since the 2 narrative orders are so similar to each other, you can't be blamed if you get confused. Where are you at this moment? Like, is it the present or is it the flashback? It is therefore the body alone in the novel which serves as the uniting element in the 2 orders of narration. It is the body which bears the mark of history, and it is the body which is the only locus of memory. Devoid of all memory and even of language, the need to go home so desperately felt by the protagonist is a visceral fact. What is memory in temporariness? What is memory once you step out of linear time? Considering that as far as the protagonist is concerned, his memory is purely visceral, the location of memory, which is home, is a destination rather than a lost order of time. The order of narrative and the order of migrant corporeality is in opposite directions, which is that the narrative begins from home, but the body is oriented towards home. While the narration tries to build in the past a memory that is in the order of time, and home is the only guarantee as this time, for the migrant body, home is a destination which is unsupported by discourse. Home is an orientation of the body existing as a possible future time space. The present is the only reality, and yet that reality is but a shadow play of the bodies. Home as both the past of a realist narrative, the future of a body. This is the effect of temporariness, which is a present that is filled by the body and is in excess of narration. Now, as much as Gulf is therefore a heterochronia where people get newly named, so is photography. The revolutionary feature of photography is its indexicality. It captures what is put in front of it. So Christopher Pinney would say in his book, The Coming of Photography in India, that Indians became individuals first in front of the camera and only later as a political reality. The indexicality of photography has often led to the appreciation of its value in linear time. The photograph can show in the future what today was. There is, in recourse to the invocation of future and memory with reference to photographs, an assumption of time as a continual flow with more or less predictability. But the indexicality of photograph, however, has a different effect too. Indexicality allows photographs to exceed the human design as well as transcend the inherent human limitations. In Walter Benjamin's assessment of photography, the technology effects a paradigm shift from the distancing aura to a congealing of potentialities that transcend the potentialities of the here and now. I quote him, "We are compelled to find the inconspicuous place in which, in the essence of that moment which passed long ago, the future nestles still today, so eloquently that we, looking back, are able to discover it." Unquote. The indexicality of photograph not only effaces human intention, it effects misrecognition, which is a term that I use from Christopher Pinney, which is that the photograph can capture what is put in front of it, irrespective of whether this profilmic space adheres to reality. The photograph is a medium in which the space and time of the here and now can be replaced with alternative possibilities. So the object of this talk is to look at the possibilities of studying photograph along this other time as opened by the incorporation of the problematic of temporariness. So I now turn to my first photograph. In this photograph, taken in Abu Dhabi in 1981, we see two men shaking hands with each other. The distance between them and the stretch of the hands suggest that they are unknown to each other. These are two strangers meeting in the city. Behind them, the Abu Dhabi Corniche, constructed in the second half of the 70s, stretches to infinity. The broad walkway by the sea, lined by streetlights, clearly convey that this place belongs to the city and developed world. It is a deep composition. While the two men occupy the space closer to the foreground, a lonely figure in white is visible towards the background. The bright sea, the shaded corniche, and the dark, undefined boulders meet at the vanishing point where the walkway meanders to the right. The two men are impeccably dressed. They are wearing shiny black shoes. Their shirts are in vogue. What could this photograph of a real space rendered fantastic tell us about migrant self-representation in temporariness? The reading of this photograph requires us to see for its intermediality. The photograph is caught with moment that is rightly to be considered as a freeze frame. In its form, the shot of the photograph is closer to Malayalam film's depiction of the city as a space of crime, thrills, and adventure. The beginning of the 1980s saw a few Malayalam movies that were set in foreign locations. Erangadalinakkare, for example, 1979, Vilkanundu Swapnangal, 1980, Love in Singapore, 1980, America, America, 1983, Mandanmar Londonil, 1983, Iniyangilum, 1985. I mean, this has to do with the coming of Gulf money also at that time. Eram Kadalnakare begins with the premise of two migrant laborers to the US, one a driver and the other a nurse, but soon turns into a narrative of casinos and chases and killings, and aligns with the gangster film genre, with a considerable chunk of the screen time dedicated to the wonders of the First World. America, America, screenwritten by T. Damodaran, directed by I.V. Shashi, is completely set in the US, shot mainly in Florida. The film is a whodunit around the murder of the captain of a ship, and like Erangadal Nakare, it is a veritable procession of the marvels of the First World. High rises, digital hoardings, long glitzy cars, seaplanes, disco bars, and an Afro-American muscle man whose signature stunt move reminds one of Muhammad Ali. Love in Singapore, shot mostly in Singapore, shares the same grammar as these other movies, with its high rises, rooftops with views, shopping malls, women in Western wear. The plot follows the investigation around a relic stolen from Kerala and taken to Singapore. The investigating officer from Kerala meets his long-lost brother in Singapore, starring Prem Nasir and Jain as the two brothers having to deal with crime in Singapore in their own ways. Love in Singapore again shows the foreign to be a location of thrills and adventure. The foreign location in these films is a place of crime as well as romantic relations which do not involve the pedigrees of the characters. Iniyangilum was shot partially in Tokyo. This film too represents the foreign locale as a place of high rises, glistening cars, high density of vehicular traffic, and a place of shootouts and thrills. The affinity of the photograph with these movies of thrills and adventures is hard to miss. The handshake between strangers are a staple of these films. When new associations are made in the city, whether for nefarious reasons or for the noble reason of fighting the bad guys, this is how the interested parties meet, with their hands stretched out as in a business meeting. It is suggestive of a modern association. It is very different from greetings which do not touch each other or meetings which involve much closer proximity to each other. The shaking of hands is when people meet in a city, for there are things to be done, deals to be fixed. These are men on a mission. Listen to the picture and you can even hear English. How do you do? The two people we see in the picture, as we might have expected by now, are quite known to each other. They are flatmates, and so is the one who is taking the photograph. These three have set out one Friday, being a holiday, to photograph themselves against the wonders of the new place that they are in now. What we have in the photograph is an instance of imposturing. It is one of those instances when photograph is relieved of its task to be an indexical document and is made to picture a fantastic situation. The impact of James Bond films is discernible in these films that I discussed. However, these are not films which involve international geopolitical relations, but a bid to reproduce the attractions of the thrillers within the affordances of the vernacular. In a study of transnational imagination in action cinema, Megan Morris, with reference to action cinema, which is in minor mode, that is those films which are not made under the auspices of the big studios, observe that the pitch of these films is broadly to a mobile and self-selecting community rather than state-based modes of affective mobilization. But ultimately it is in the nationalist register. The photograph, whose debt to transnational action cinema is evident, is the staging of the self-selection of a community. In the faint encounter, that is the handshake in the photograph, the migrant conjures the meeting of two people, an affiliation that now strives to go beyond filiation, even as kinship networks play a major role in the migration process and the condition of possibility of this very photograph. The close friends who are also flatmates become strangers in the photograph. The elder sibling who photographs becomes invisible. The personal is sundered for it to be open to receive the affinities and affiliations the world can bring. These are quite meaningless photos, which thereby brings their meaninglessness to the fore. These are acts of mimicry. What does this performativity, this excess do? If anything, the interocularity, which is the connection between different visual images, here the connection between this picture and the film, the thriller genre of films. If anything, the interocularity serves to construct the Gulf as a place which is like Manhattan. When photograph becomes a still from an unfolding action, the being there, the place of the action in its continuous present tense is an evolving possibility rather than the given of a there then. Like photographs are usually understood as if it is the capturing of a there then. Oh, this is how it used to be. What we have here is the being there, is the constant unfolding of a present tense. The migrant laborer thus constructs the city in their leisure as much as in their labor. The Gulf becomes the terra nova of new relations, new settlements, new possibilities, new futures. What is evident in these photographs is the capacity to aspire, and aspirations are fashioned by the possibilities obtained in a given historical time. The migrant's body was their potential, and as much as this might be a precarious state to be in, it was still a possibility to be free from the deterrence of a traditional society that makes some bodies disqualified bodies. The body with traces of history is left behind for a body for which to shed one's skin for another is in its very nature. Impersonation becomes a migrant reality as much as it is a photographic reordering. This photograph is hardly even personal. It partakes of a language which belongs to the public space of the cinema hall. Ordered thus, it brings in the public to the personal. It stages the personal as public, operative in public knowledge. The performativity, the very nature of its excess, gives its reader a privileged access as the one who is capable of reading and interpreting the situation. In the photograph, we apprehend the noirish scantiness of an evening of new deals. The camera is placed at a high angle. This is a shot which is not supposed to foster identification with any of these characters. The high angle of the shot suggests conveying objective and authoritative knowledge. Even as the meeting of two strangers is staged, it is staged as if it is a clandestine affair, as if it is a secret affair. The meeting is enacted as being away from the public gaze. In this, the camera frees itself from the artist and reenacts the transparent medium that it is supposed to be. And the migrant photographer manipulates this transparent being of the camera to reveal a secret, one that shares its grammar with the glamour of cinema and its space with the glitz of the wondrous urbanity. In the sense that in this picture, it's as if we are seeing it from a from an objective position, this picture. And therefore, we assume that the camera is independent, the camera is neutral, that it is showing us a reality and therefore it is revealing a reality. The noirish sparseness, this very crime thriller kind of sparseness of the location gives it an edgy freeze. One is standing at the tip of an action about to unfold. The photograph is the staging of a pleasure, that of belonging to the new world, but one that is articulated in the thrill of a secret. It is the disavowed display of a private world. Like cinema, in its very staging, it seeks transparency. So, in this, the gaze of the camera intersects with the viewer of the photograph. So, we see what exactly the camera sees. But then here is a catch, which is that given that its grammar is that of the transnational action cinema, that of thrillers, it means that the camera threatens to slip away from a position of neutrality. In the sense that if you are watching this film, most probably the next scene is that you were looking through the eyes of someone else. So the pleasure of the photograph is actually that not only is this a secret, but also the revealing of a secret. So there is an intimation of a gaze involved, as if someone else is looking, someone not seen by those in the picture. It's like they do not know, but someone is looking at them. The scene is suddenly one of being exposed. We feel as the viewer of photograph, we feel another body. But because the gaze of that third person coincides with our own, we are turned into a voyeur, existing within the diegetic space of the photograph. The chill and thrill now is because of an intimate foreboding that this body, whose vision I share, might be up to something that I do not approve of. I mean, imagine these are the protagonists of the film. Then the guy who is looking at it is the villain. But then you don't identify with the villain. Your body is that of the villains, but your mind is not that of the villains. You feel this body beside yourselves. The pleasure of the photograph is in communicating stealthily of a third gaze. And in that frozen moment, the viewer, if in the know, is caught between the third gaze and herself. That is to say, the photograph, while an indexical medium, is also, in its performativity, a calling out to the subject in the know. In the interocularity with the transnational action film, it calls forth the subject who is instantly presented with a place within the photograph. Even though there are only two people in the photograph, you exist in the photograph because the photograph turns itself into a narrative. This is an invitation if only one knows it. It is the excess itself which serves to produce a distinction and thereby produce a knowing subject, a citizen, one who is able to read beyond one's confines, that you are not just you looking at the photograph, but you are also somebody else looking at the photograph. Not looking at the photograph, but looking at the scene. The one who can be beside oneself. This performativity is also the carving out of a seemingly transparent medium, such as photograph, an enjoyment available only to some, which is that even in such a film, in such a photograph, there is an insiderism in play, in the sense that the thrill of the photograph precisely is that some know and some do not. In the sense that some people can relate to the photograph because they understand the grammar of the photograph. So this is like all franchisee films. It has a fan culture inbuilt into the photograph. The lure of the Gulf is also the chance to partake in this community of enjoyment. in alienation. This is an enjoyment in alienation. To be in a state of temporariness is thus to be an excess that one can feel about oneself. The lure of the Gulf is the lure to be beside oneself. The invitation is one to enjoy being uncertain of what the body whose vision we share is up to. To experience the world ironically in doubling of selves as an excess. I now go into my second photograph. This photograph is from one of the albums that is now tucked in a forgotten corner in a Gulf migrant's house in Kerala. These are photographs stuck to the covering film, discolored and decaying. The stale photograph, that is what I call these, the stale photograph bears a unique witness to the passing of the time in its most concrete form, disallowing us to observe time's imprint in its contents. Like time has stopped us from seeing time. The stale photograph bears on its body the signs of negligence, that it has not been taken care of in the face of time. Exuding the weight of its enfoldment, the stale photograph marks the unmourned, unavailable as a visual reminder and remainder of a phase which is arguably the source of all that changed in the lives of the migrants and their families. These photographs, which were once upon a time the site of a narration of worlds elsewhere, now lie hidden in a world that only dares to move forward. Once upon a time, it showed promises of youth, promises that were in the horizon, but still in the future. That future has arrived, but not that future. The future has arrived, but the photograph is now forgotten and was taken out only because I asked them to. The photograph shows the sign of time having passed. In that this time's passing does not allow us to see in detail how the passing of time was conceived in the photograph. Time obscures time. Time replaces time in its effects. A new time has taken over. What does such stale image tell us about time imagined from the vantage of temporariness? That is, photographs taken by those who thought of their own mission as temporary, for the time being, nothing enduring. Stale images points us to two things. One, time as destructive, away from the notion of progress. This is the negative labor of time. Negative labor is the labor involved in destroying things rather than producing things. In the staleness of images, one sees the gnawing away of an exterior to the reality of the future. This is the real, creeping into our imaginaries of the idea of a future time, away from the uber-modernity that we believe it to be. The second pointer from the stale image is to treat photograph not as an instrument of memorialization, but of imposture, of impossible postures. To go back to both senses of temporariness, which is that, like at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned there are two kinds of temporariness. One, how the Gulf states view temporariness, how the migrants themselves view temporariness. So to go back to both senses of temporariness, both senses of the temporary, rather than leading to something enduring and permanent, is conceived of as temporary precisely in the exit of the subject from it. The state thinks of the laborer as temporary, not their labor, which is expected to endure. The Gulf worker thinks of his Gulf stay, his labor, as temporary, but not himself, and it is temporary because he or she will exit the Gulf. Conceived as such, then, as different from Urwich, we have a temporariness that is characterized by the thought of extinction rather than endurance. A temporariness that is characterized by patiency rather than activity. So patiency is the power to be moved. When we speak of power, we always think of it as an activity, the power to move something, to move someone. Now, William Mazzarella has developed this concept of patiency as opposed to activity, which is the power to be moved, because even to be moved requires a power. And the Gulf migrant laborers are basically a temporary group which is characterized by this patiency rather than by the activity which Urwich had mentioned, like all those F categories, E, F, G, H categories, yes. So the stale image is to be read from this vantage point of an imagined extinction. And in that imagined extinction, this photograph is a thread that is both in the present of the temporariness and as the future of that temporariness. But what it is not is the possibility of looking back from a future. That is, what this photograph is not is the projection into the future. What this means is that what the photograph actively denies is the possibility of imagining oneself in the future as a position from which one's present can be looked back into. In the sense that usually when we say that, okay, let's photograph this moment, let's see what, so that it is there 20 years later, we assume 20 years later. There is already an assumption of a future involved in the present. What temporariness does not allow is precisely this. Perhaps in the oceanic imagination of migration, what the photograph presents is the unfolding of multiple times in their passing, in their temporariness, impossible to recover and meaningless to mourn, with failing memories and aspirations that are already out of date. Reading the migrant images involves culling time out of its trajectory and revisiting it as projections of possibilities across time spaces. That is, as imposturing of time itself, as projections of a time which is not time, which is not this time, of being projections of a temporary time whose past and future are on a different trajectory, projecting us, becoming us in another dimension, one that is lost to gaze. So to conclude, the stale images symbolize the multiscalar and multivectoral sites in which migration demands to be studied. It refuses to be treated in a single or in a linear dimensional manner. These photographs are then tucked away in some forgotten corner of the house, not discarded, just tucked away. They run color and become unrecognizable. It might often be the case that the lost world could only be recovered anecdotally, hypothetically, tangentially, tentatively. Those epistemes which discard the totalitarian for the possibilities of the singular. These demand us of, these stories, these narrations demand of us creativity, some storytelling, some world making, and a singular leap of imagination. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shafeeq. We are opening the session to Q&A now. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll pass you the microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll pass you the microphone.
So since we're live on YouTube, what we're going to do is we're going to thank you. And, and then if you have questions after the session, we can carry on the discussion. Usually the discussions go on for quite some time. But we can understand, since you haven't had the mics in your hands, it'll take you some time to warm up. So on behalf of the Madhavan Nair Foundation and the Kerala Museum, I'd really like to thank Dr. Shafeeq for his generosity and his willingness to come down here and do this lecture on the general lecture series with us. One of the most exciting, we felt, topics that we've covered so far in general. And it's been a journey of time travel and some very interesting ways to look at what is migrant aspiration in Kerala. We didn't know about this temporariness angle to the lecture until you started on temporariness, and that gave us a whole new twist to start looking at the photograph. So I think that first I'd like to thank the Georgette Foundation, who supported the Journal Talks series and the journal program. It's part of a larger excavation of stories that are connected to Kerala and how we look at a recent history of Kerala through an intersectional lens. And so a heartfelt thank you to the Georgette Foundation for supporting this series. I'd also like to thank the organizing team here, Raji and Saro and Nawaz and Nitin and then Megha and a lot of others behind the scenes at the Kerala Museum as well for putting this together. The talks happen every alternate week, either Friday or a Saturday. And do spread the word. If you would like to receive updates, please save the Kerala Museum number there. We have a small token of appreciation for you, Dr. Shafeeq. We hope you don't have this book yet. But
anyways,
yeah, that's okay. So, yeah. So we'll take questions after we wrap up then. Yeah. Thank you all for coming. In the middle of your busy Onam schedules, I'm sure this was a tough one, but thank you all for coming.
I'm saying it's very exciting for an academic to be invited by a non-university organization, and it is immensely, I was quite delighted to receive your mail, which invited me to this place. Yeah, thank you, thanks, yeah.
How many people from universities are you guys all from studying from, yeah? Which colleges? Kaladi. And which, what's your English? Okay, and NID?
So a couple of us are photography design students itself from NID. So we just thought we'll come and have a listen to what you say.
So actually all of us are sort of working on a project within Kerala and Kochi at the moment. So it felt very contextual and relevant. We made it late, but hopefully we can talk after the session and we could know more. So yeah.
So the sessions are also live on YouTube and broadcast and available for you to catch up on if you want to use it as a study reference anytime later. And of course, Dr. Shafeeq and others will be sharing it, so please reshare with anyone you feel would benefit from the. We have a few people who have lived abroad and in our audience as well. So I'm sure this was an interesting lecture for them as well.
I think, Dr. Shafeeq, for lay people, to really capture the concept of what you were trying to explain to us takes a little time, because we have never looked at things the way you have, the way you have explained in that sense. And also, I guess, even for when you talk about movies and how movies depict, being in a foreign land and the adventure, or, the what shall I say, the difference between living here and the kind of spaces that the foreign land offers, and the way they kind of sort of represents, the possibility of some kind of mysterious activity, or, complex actions and things like that, characters doing things. It is definitely a new way to look at any picture that you are looking at, like, that the possibilities of looking at a picture in so many different ways. That itself is an eye-opener for somebody who has not studied photography, so to speak.
I don't know what to say exactly about this, but it was really, I was looking forward to this because I am actually spent my life in Bombay, but my father has actually worked in Middle East in the 80s. And there have been like, the only way to connect the Middle East for me was through movies and through photographs from the Middle East. And that was like strange experience because I have never been there. So my memory is only through the movies. And I remember one movie in particular, which maybe you mentioned or not, I'm not sure, but it's called this Narodikat, 1988 or 87. I think that was for me like, kind of like, kind of a pivotal movie for understanding this migration from Kerala, because I was never in Kerala. So through these movies, I came to understand why people move and what is the situation, why people move out from Kerala, like in general, everywhere. And of course, I grew up in that generation where a lot of relatives and uncles and all, at least at some phase, have been abroad and all that. So I've grown up in these kind of memories, basically, So yeah, it's really interesting. I was just hoping for more photographs, actually, so there could be more like those kind of experiences. Maybe next time, if you add some more pictures, it would be nice. Thanks.
So I've been doing a series of works on Gulf migrant photographs. I have been able to publish quite a few. This is not yet. This is going to be the part of my book, which is coming up with Oxford University Press. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, basically, I've been looking at it for the past 2020 onwards. For the past 3 years, I have looked at a series of photographs, looking at it from different angles. So, in fact, I also mentioned this film, Narodikat, because, I mean, in a left-handed way, in the sense that, had they managed to actually reach Gulf, they would have never been able to join CBI. So, in that sense, like, it's that failure is very important in that film. So, yeah. So, maybe we can share email IDs. I can send you my works later on. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm here. I'm a teacher, And I don't think what I'm going to say will be of that level that probably we were taken to by you. Thank you. I just want to say that, photographs, we had a group, Teacher Foundation from Bangalore, coming for teacher development. I worked in the choice school, so we teachers had these ongoing sessions to make teaching more interesting and more meaningful for students. So photographs were used actually at one session. In fact, it was a photograph of the Bhopal gas tragedy. And very few of us really recognized that. And we were split into groups. And the kind of the emotions, and it was a kind of a story creating session from that single photograph, different groups, their perspective on the, on that situation. It was amazing, actually, and it created a kind of, interest and kind of excitement among the learners. So that's just what I want to say, that it can be used as a medium of learning as well, to that creative aspect in students to arouse. I just want to share that, though it may not be in line with what you were explaining. Thank you.
No, that is precise. I mean, the moment I saw this picture, actually this photograph is what made me write it. I just happened to see this photograph and I was thinking that, no, without a story, this is nothing. What is this photograph? Like basically it has that story inbuilt into it. It's just actually about getting that story. Thanks.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that it was nice to see the Walter Benjamin quote, because one of the key things I studied back in design school in NID also was like the idea of the aura of the picture. And I was wondering, today's memories, like in this digital form, have you also looked at how that has been changing the impact of a picture? The way that you have described is like this transcultural, or this effect of this aura thing. Like, I don't know, have you researched about digital pictures, and how, does it create a similar effect?
I'm not sure if I can answer this question, but what is interesting about these pictures is that in these photographs Walter Benjamin's point is that photography frees itself from the human intent, and therefore from the idea of at one point, at one time, this happened. Now, these are photographs, but one cannot really understand these photographs without that dreamlike quality to the photographs. In the sense that what makes Gulf so fascinating in the 70s, 80s in Kerala is that it is both real and fantastic at the same time. One can actually go there, but it is so fantastic that there is both indexicality and this aura or this fantasy there. Like aura is the distance, right? That there-ness of the image, as well as it is an everyday ordinary image, both coexist. And that is actually what makes it so, that is the secret affective migration, which is that one can lead, everyone knows. It's not as if we did not know that life in Gulf is one of hardship. At the same time, there is also this other element of pleasure, and that pleasure is built by these photographs. And it can be built by these photographs not because they are fantastic, but because that fantasy is very real, in the sense that it is using the medium of photography. So about this digital part, I really do not know, in the sense that it is a very different, imagine that viewing a photo album is a very different family experience. It is inbuilt into a thrill, this is something that I speak about in length as part of this, which is that, see, even now, we have a very strong idea of the idea of black eye, which is that if you are in a very good position, unlike post-liberalization era especially, in those days you did not want people to see that. You wanted people to see that, but with certain filters, because the idea of someone's black eye falling on you is a very distinct possibility. So the albums are really a place of prestige and privilege. The privilege to look at an album is not given to the public. So it's a very different order of viewing community as opposed to digital. So it's not just about the medium. That entire viewing experience is different, but I have not studied the digital part so much. But of course, it's a very different thing, like how people put black clothes. It is to ward off certain evil. But Gulf is so fantastic, You don't want someone coming by your house to think, oh, he's in great position now, and then, that guy will lose his job there. You don't want that to happen. So it has to be very, moderated kind of pre-liberalization, pre that age where we could not show our wealth like this. So I think that plays a very important role in this kind of visuality. Yeah.
If there are no more questions, I think we'll wrap up the session. Thank you so much, Dr. Shafeeq, for being here. As a researcher, I felt it was an excellent talk on methodology. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Like ma'am said, it's the Onam weekend, and I know all of you are busy. So thank you so much. Hopefully, we'll see you for the next lecture, which is on the 7th of September. And it's actually by Dr. Shafeeq's PhD guide, Satish Potwal sir. So hopefully, you'll all be here. Thank you all for coming.